This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. So as I prepare on Sunday, January 2nd, to take off for parts unknown, I hear there's a snowstorm coming in the Washington, D.C. area where I happen to be. And I'm like, there's no way. It's 65 degrees on January 1st and 2nd. Seriously, almost 65 degrees. So they're saying there's going to be a snowstorm on January 3rd. I'm like, nah, come on. So I had a 10:30 a.m. flight on Monday. I cruise out to Washington Dulles Airport. It's snowing, but it's not sticking to the road. I get there early to do all the COVID restriction baloney and all that kind of stuff for where I'm flying to. And as I wait a few hours, all of a sudden the snow starts sticking. My flight gets delayed 3 hours, but I do get out of there. I make it to Dubai, but my connecting flight, it's long gone. So that just means a 3-day layover in Dubai, part of COVID craziness. But even in a situation like I described, this kind of odd travel experience, I had a chance to talk to people. I talked to a Jamaican woman who lives in Miami. I talked to an older white guy who lives in Richmond, Virginia. I talked to multiple Emirates Air staff, from Uganda to South Africa to Poland to Jordan. Super wide variety. I've talked to many Pakistani taxi drivers, a Lebanese engineer. This is the part that we're all missing the last 2 years. The talking with different people. Now, I get a chance to talk with different people on my podcast, so I don't feel as isolated, perhaps, as you might feel. But still, the in-person experience, even if we're having to wear the damn mask in many situations, we've been missing it. The humanity. Now, talking with all those different people that I just mentioned, men and women, all these different countries, something interesting happens. Now, of course, after doing this podcast, I'm pretty good at asking questions, and I'll talk to anybody. So I think sometimes I take people aback when I just start talking to them. How are you? Where are you from? What do you do? Maybe I say it in a way that's disarming. I'm not saying I say it exactly like that, what I just said, so direct, but I'll work my way in there. But people open up. Sometimes there's a few walls, like the guy from Uganda who worked for Emirates Air ground staff in Dubai while I was waiting for my bags from my missed connecting flight. He didn't really want to talk to me at first, but then he opened up and he started telling me a little bit about Uganda, things that I have no idea about. I've never been to Uganda. But this is what we're missing in this 2-year COVID insanity. The conversation, the connection. I was able to talk to this Jamaican lady, black Jamaican lady, and she's telling me about the differences between her perspective of growing up as a black Jamaican and her American black girlfriends in the States. What a fascinating conversation. I love to hear about people and their thoughts about the human condition. What do they see different? What do they see similar? Again, this is what we're missing during this COVID timeframe. And I think it's about time that we all put our foot down because we've gone too far with COVID crazy. We've gone way too far. The people that are making these decisions are not making these decisions, the restrictions, in our best interests. No way. They're doing it for bureaucratic reasons. Are there nefarious reasons? Possibly. I'm not going to rule it out. But it's definitely bureaucratic incompetence. It's definitely overkill. We've now reached the point after knowing that lightning can strike anybody, but we therefore should not be scared of lightning because it's so rare. We have now taken these very rare instances, statistically speaking, of COVID death, especially with this Omicron variant. And we've extrapolated it out to like it's World War Z, Brad Pitt, and everyone becomes a zombie when you have Omicron. Take a look at the countries doing zero COVID. This is crazy stuff. And what is it doing? It's taking us away from each other. It's taking us away from the opportunity to learn something new, like I just described, with all those people that I kind of forced myself onto. And I didn't force myself in a bad way. I asked questions. People like to be asked questions. People want to tell you their story. If they trust you, they want to talk. Again, this is what COVID is doing to us. It's taking that away. There's a cost to that. It's not just, well, that's not a big deal. No, it's a big cost. So in the spirit of a conversation with a very wise thinker, somebody who likes to think about the human condition, the human soul, so to speak, let me do a little replay as I head on my final leg to parts unknown. Let me play a little best of. Just a quick reminder to bring you into the spirit of thinking about the human condition. Because this stuff will all pass. It will go away. I don't know what we should do with the people that have put this all upon us. They sure as hell should not have control of society anymore. They sure as hell should not be making decisions that affect wide populations. And don't get me wrong, this is clearly, I can see this now as I travel the globe. This is a multi-country problem. It's not just one country. Now, I'm afraid America is the leader in insanity. There's no doubt about that. And I think America's insanity quickly spreads to other governments. America's panic spreads to other governments. But this is the lay of the landscape, and we all have to push back. Because what we want are the conversations. What we want are the connections. Yes, this is not a riff or a monologue about trend following. It's just one about being human. And with that, let me jump into one of my favorite episodes. I hope you enjoy. My guest today is Jack Canfield, American author, motivational speaker, corporate trainer, and entrepreneur. He is co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. 500 million copies in print? 40 languages? Wow, that is insane. That is absolutely massive numbers. I am forever honored to have so many successful, interesting guests in this show. And Jack only adds to that roster. Without any further delay, let's get into my conversation today with one of the best-selling authors of all time. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Jack, you look good, but I got to take you off video because I'm 8,000 miles away.
Okay, so we're doing audio only?
Yeah, you look good, though.
That's fine. Take me off.
You got to click on your end. There should be a little video camera and just hit that button.
There we go.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah, I'm calling you from Saigon, so I'm a touch away.
There you go. You are a touch away. How is everything in Saigon with the coronavirus and all?
It seems like Asia's got this figured out a little bit. I'm more worried about the States. I'm American, so I'm a little more worried about what's going on there.
Yeah, it's pretty ugly here. We're locked down in about 5 states. New York City, it's a total mess at the moment. I think they've had 20,000 confirmed cases, and you're not allowed to leave your house except for essential, like to go to the pharmacy or a doctor or a hospital. So everyone's learning how to do what we're doing, work from home. People are doing all kinds of webinars on Zoom. I'm amazed Zoom hasn't crashed yet.
I think my first question, just since we started on video for a second, how old are you?
I am 74 45 in August.
Okay, what's the secret?
What, to looking as young as I do?
Look, people, I'm not the first person to tell you this.
Yeah.
And I like to think of myself as bringing this too, but you have a certain energy. And I know that goes all to your work and the way you live your life and all that, but it's a nice feeling to have that. And I know you have it.
I do. A lot of people say I look like I'm in my late 50s, early 60s. I would say about three things. Number one, I started eating very healthy and taking lots of supplements when I was in my late 20s. I got involved in the whole health food movement. Number two, I exercise regularly, do yoga, meditate. Number three, I've forgiven everyone in my life. Number four, I am someone who is pursuing the things I love. I think when you're not living in resentment and frustration and blaming, complaining, but you're living a life of passion, doing what you love to do, that really helps quite a lot. And I have a great wife and great kids, so there's a lot of love in my life. And I've chosen to be loving and to be of service rather than to be in fear. So I would say all of those things probably add up. And I'd like to say it's good genes, but my younger brother looks older than I do. And my youngest brother died already. So I don't know.
There's something you said there. And look, this is going to be a conversation. I'm going to take you all over the map. But you said something there to forgiven everyone in your life. That strikes me. I see so many people that get stuck in the past because I think forgiving is ultimately about letting go and letting go of the past, living in the moment. Speak to that some.
A lot of people think if they forgive somebody, they're somehow condoning what they did. They've sexually abused me, they robbed me, they embezzled money from me, they talked behind my back, they had an affair, whatever it is. And the reality is when you're forgiving, you're giving for yourself. You're not condoning their behavior, but you're realizing two things. Number one, this was such an important thing in my life when I realized that everybody is always doing the best they can to meet some basic need they have with the best knowledge, skills, and tools they have at the time. If somebody embezzled money from me, they were trying to maybe feed their family or whatever. At the time, they didn't have the skills to ask or to negotiate or to earn the money on their own. A gang member, when they're out there stealing your car, they didn't learn enough in school to be effective at making a living. And so they're out there wanting to be included in the gang. They want to feel like they belong. They want to be able to take their girlfriend to the movie. So this is what they do. One of the sad things about our prison system is we don't really teach people new skills and new concepts, but we punish them. And so they teach each other how to be better criminals. So for me, I realized early on, and I had a lot of things that I felt resentful for. I mean, I had a divorce where I felt like I got screwed by the justice system. I had people embezzle money from me. I had a person screw me in a real estate deal. I can go down the list. But the point being, I realized that every time you think a negative judgmental thought, especially of anger and resentment, you're actually secreting more acid into your body. And we know that your body is healthy when it's in an alkaline state, which is why I eat mostly a plant-based diet, why I do the supplements I do, why I don't want to have any of those feelings living in my body, creating cortisol, ruining my neurotransmitters and all that good stuff. For me, forgiving is a gift. And one of my friends recently said, nothing ever happens against you. It always happens for you. You think about the things that happened. My first wife kind of screwed me financially, but it forced me to get really creative about how to make more money. And as a result of that, I did really well. It's when I started doing things like Chicken Soup for the Soul, and I had to get creative. And thank God, all of those things happened. Garth Brooks has a wonderful song called Thank God for Unanswered Prayers. And he talks about in the song, he says, you go back to your high school reunion 25 years later, and that girl you had a crush on who wouldn't go out with you is now this overweight alcoholic. And you go, thank God for unanswered prayers. I think that we realize that everything really does happen for us. And if you at least leave your life from that principle, then you don't have to carry around a lot of resentment.
Before we dive into some success principles and really give people some hope for trying times, because I think there's no greater definition of trying times than right now in March of 2020. But I want to go back in time. I want to understand Jack as a young man. For example, Jack is 13, Jack at 25, Jack at 35. I want to see some of this progression. I want to understand the progression. What were you doing at 13? What was your mindset? What were you thinking?
Oh, I was a typical Midwestern kid. At 13, I was probably figuring out how to survive when my parents moved to a new part of town. I didn't know anybody. So I was just trying to be cool and have everyone like me and ride my bicycle and engage in BB gun fights and all that kind of crazy stuff you do growing up in West Virginia. Also, I was in a military school at the time. I was poor, but I had a rich aunt, and she had a son named Jack who was killed in an automobile accident. So she kind of adopted me, not to live with her, but to just kind of give me some advantages that my brothers didn't get. If my name was Bob, I might not be talking to you today. I got a good education, but I was going to a school where all the other kids, their parents were the doctors, the newspaper editor, the lawyers. My dad was selling cash registers. It was a really different world. I always felt like I was in that world, but I wasn't of that world. I didn't belong to the country club, but I got to be a lifeguard working at the country club pool. So I was in that world, but I was looked down on. So I was trying to be included. That's probably what was going on for me.
And as you start to move to late teens, early 20s, were there inspirations, were there mentors, influences that ultimately ended up shaping you when you were putting together something like Chicken Soup for the Soul?
Yeah, by the time I was in my early 20s, I was going to graduate school at the University of Chicago, learning how to be a high school teacher. And I taught history for a number of years. And it was during the civil rights movement. Someone that I met at a laundromat invited me to go to Jesse Jackson's church. I thought, okay, why not? I went that Sunday, and I really got inspired by someone who was basically had a message of motivation and self-empowerment, self-responsibility for African Americans in Chicago. And it was an integrated church, although it was probably 95% Black. That was the beginning of opening up my eyes. And then the same person who I met in the laundromat invited me to go to a lecture series called Masters of Motivation or something like that. I went, and there was a guy named Herbert Otto who was the director of the National Center for the Exploration of Human Potential. And he was saying we are only using 10% of our brain, our mind power. So I said, wow, I want to use more than that. So I went up after the talk and I said, where can I learn to do more? And he said, well, there's this growth center called Oasis in Chicago. You could go and take workshops there. That next year, I took 17 weekend workshops. I think I paid for 10 of them, and the rest of them I just volunteered to hand out Kleenex, workbooks, clean up afterwards, whatever. I ran out of money. But I got exposed to all this human potential where we have unlimited potential. And that's where I met someone who introduced me to W. Clement Stone, who was a friend of Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, and that changed my life.
It's amazing sometimes where there's the one moment. It's not exactly one moment for you, but you can kind of bring it to one class of moments. It changes everything. It's an amazing feeling when you look back on it. And so you look back, you're like, gosh, that one moment, and it pivots and opens up the world, opens up your eyes to everything.
Yeah, I should write a blog called All Started in a Laundromat. It's like, no, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been sitting there when this guy came in and said, put your book down and talk to me.
What year would that have been, probably, roughly?
Oh, but that probably was 1968, 69, right in there.
Now, 1968 was a really volatile year for America. It was the year I was born, but I know historically that was a rough year for America.
Yeah, I think Martin Luther King was killed that year. Bobby Kennedy or Jack Kennedy was in 63, I think. There was a lot going on. I mean, I was teaching in a Black school when Martin Luther King was killed, Malcolm X was killed. We had riots in our school. So yeah, there was a lot going on.
There would not have been, I'm guessing, at that particular point in time with a lot of strife, and again, that 68, 69 time period, why did you feel comfortable going to do something that probably to this day, a lot of white Americans would not want to do, would not want to go to a completely different church with a completely different group of people? What made you compelled and want to go do that?
Well, I think what preceded that was when I first got to the University of Chicago. It was a Master of Arts in Education degree. We had this orientation where they took us around to a bunch of different schools just to give us a sense of the kind of schools that were out there that we could practice teach in when we got to that level. And one of them was called Rich Township, which it really was. It was a very affluent community. Everyone was wearing nice clothes, and the school was really well equipped, and teachers were cool. And then the next school we went to was DuSable High School, which was listed as one of the worst schools in America at that time by Time Magazine. The teachers weren't that motivated. The kids were not being educated very well. There was not a lot of supplies. And something in me, I don't know what it was, said, I could really make a difference here. So when it was time to ask for our teaching assignments, I said, I would like an all-Black school. And they gave it to me. So I'd had 1 year of that experience when the guy says, "Do you want to go to Jesse Jackson's church?" So at that point, it wasn't that difficult. But I think if they hadn't had that tour, I don't think I would have chosen to go to see a black school. It was totally outside of my experience. But when I went there, and because it was part of the journey, if you will, the tour, something in me woke up.
So far, though, if I listen to your story, and obviously I read about your story to begin with, you're one of these people where an event happens that spurs you to the next event and the next event and the next event. It doesn't seem to be this great, well-laid plan. It's more like you seem to be inspired at each moment to follow the best course of action at the moment of inspiration.
I think that's really true. And I think people often ask me, what's the secret of your success? You're a multimillionaire. You've sold 500 million books. You've been in The Secret and, yada, yada, yada. I always say, I always followed my heart. I trusted my intuition. I trusted the inner guidance that I got. I was working for a training company doing very well. And all of a sudden something said, go start your own company. That was very scary. I had to borrow $10,000 from my mother-in-law just to start a company. At a certain point, I wanted to change that company, not do the same thing anymore. And when Chicken Soup for the Soul was at the height of its success, something in me said, I'm tired of this. I don't want to do it anymore. And that's when I sold that company and started the Kempfield Training Group. So yeah, I think that's true. I've always the next thing that I would be exposed to or something would inspire me and I had the courage to take the risk.
I can relate to the idea of authoring a book. I've written 5. I've had pretty good sales in the hundreds of thousands, nowhere close to 500 million. But I want you to take me back in time because I think a lot of people that perhaps have either written a book or have thought about writing a book can relate to your early experience. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Chicken Soup for the Soul was not some big advance with a big publisher rollout, was it?
No, but let me take you back even further before I answer that. So in 1976, I published my first book. It was called 100 Ways to Enhance Self-Concept in the Classroom. And I had met a man named Harold Wells, who I saw something in a newsletter that I was reading, and it inspired me to connect with him. He was developing something called the Becoming Curriculum for kids in Detroit. We hit it off as friends, and I realized we were never going to get this curriculum out there at that time, but I said, let's write a book together. We did. It sold 400,000 copies, which for an education book is ridiculous. But I had a really good direct marketing guy who worked for Prentice Hall, was the publisher. But it was a lot of work, a lot of interviews, a lot of going out. And I probably did 300 workshops for teachers, spoke at conferences everywhere. And I remember my first paid speaking engagement was for $25. I drove through a blizzard into Connecticut to do a 2-hour workshop from Massachusetts, drove back through a blizzard. It's amazing I didn't die. And I got a check for $25, and I was so excited. I said to my wife, I am a paid professional speaker. So Chicken Soup came along. It's probably the second book I did, which was in 93. And as you said, we got no advance. We were rejected by 143 publishers before we found a publisher who said, well, we'll publish it. But we said, well, how many books do you think we'll sell? He said, well, 20,000 if we're lucky. And Mark Victor Hansen, my co-author, and I said, well, that's not our vision. He said, what's your vision? I said, we want to sell 1.5 million books in a year and a half. And he laughed at us. And I'm sure people listening to this have shared their dream with someone, had them laugh out loud. And he said, there's no way. I said, there's a way. He said, well, how do you believe you can do this? I said, well, we're entrepreneurial thinkers and we're visionaries and we know how to make things happen, which in fact we did. So we sold 1.3 million in a year and a half. We missed it by 200,000, but he stopped laughing. A year later, he bought a private jet based on our income.
Let me keep you at that moment for a second. The sharing the dream and receiving a laugh. I definitely can relate to that. I'm thinking about how it shaped me though. I don't know that I wanted to prove that person wrong or it really stayed with me, but they definitely left something there to where maybe it just increases the drive more. You mentioned the story with your divorce where it kind of forced you to figure out how to make money in more unique or creative ways. Maybe for me, it's when someone laughs, it forces you to say, oh, you're going to laugh? Well, I'm going to double down and really get there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are motivated by that. I don't think everybody is, but I think a lot of people, I'll prove to you that I can do it. I think for me, my drive for success came from trying to prove I was worthy. I remember not too long ago doing some sessions with some people and really getting in touch with how I remember thinking, God, I've done 200 books. Is that enough? Am I worthy now? Part of my motivation has always been to make a difference. It's very pure. It's very, very clean. But there's also been a big self-esteem issue for me most of my life. Am I worthy? Do I deserve to be successful? Have I earned my place? Do I deserve all the wealth that I have? For me, it was more like proving I'm somebody worth paying attention to. I'm somebody worth admiring. I think for other people, you tell them no, and they go, I'll show you. So we all have the different things that motivate us. And at some point, we have to decommission the neurotic drive from the pure drive. I think I've done that in my life, but I'm not complaining. It got me where I am.
I like how you just said that you're kind of proposing a pivot. And I feel like I can relate to that idea where you just, at some point in time, the original thought or reason that kind of pushed for the start kind of disappears. And then it becomes this drive for the art or the purity of whatever you want to create.
Right. I think our ego drives us in the beginning. I think that's pretty natural. It's part of our evolution. But at some point, you have to transcend the ego and get in touch with your true self. I was just talking to a guy the other day who's written a book about, I forget the title exactly, but I think it was called The Book of You or something like that. He was saying, he reminded me of a story that I put in the first Chicken Soup for the Soul book. And he said, you're the reason I wrote this book. And I said, tell me more. And there's a story in that book called the Golden Buddha story. And it's a story about when I went to Thailand with my wife. We were doing some workshops for the government over there. Then we had a few days to be tourists. And if you go to Bangkok, one of the things you do as a tourist, you visit 3 Buddhist temples. And one of the temples is called the Temple of the Golden Buddha. And there's about a 10.5-foot tall solid gold Buddha worth about $196 million just if you were to melt down the gold. It said in a little box that was right next to it on the right-hand side on the wall where there was a piece of clay, it said in 1954, they did not know there was such a thing as a golden Buddha. They were moving this clay Buddha from one side of Bangkok to the other to make way for a road they were going to put through where this temple was. As they were lifting it up, it was surprisingly heavy. And the crane wasn't really expected, it wasn't ready for that much weight. And it kind of came back down on the earth and cracked. It started to rain and they put a tarp over it to keep it dry. And that night, the head monk came out and he shined a light under the tarp to see if it was staying dry. And he saw something gleamed back from inside the crack. And he knew that clay does not reflect light. So he, in the back where it wouldn't show if he was wrong, he chipped away at it and discovered this golden Buddha inside. Their best guess is that 300 years earlier, the Burmese were attacking Thailand and they were killing everyone along the way and stealing all their valuable things. And the message had gotten down to Bangkok. So they covered this golden Buddha with clay and painted it so no one would think it was valuable. They wouldn't melt it down. And here it was for hundreds of years. Nobody knew the golden Buddha was inside. The metaphor that my wife and I talked about at dinner that night was inside of each of us, there is a golden Buddha. There's a golden essence. There's a Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And yet it's covered up with the clay of our conditioning, our cultural conditioning that we get that makes some people racist, to make some people not, make some people Christians and some people Buddhists and some people Muslims, because it's just the conditioning you got growing up. At some point, we're responsible for removing the clay and getting back to the original essence of who we are. And I think that's what a lot of the world is doing right now. I think even during this coronavirus pandemic that we're all in, we're starting to see that we're all really one, that we can't hide. The virus does not decide if you're rich, I'll leave you alone, or if you live in this place or you're a U.S. senator, you're good. Everybody's on the same boat. We're all on the same boat when it comes to the ecological issues we're facing with the mass extinctions we're experiencing. I think that our culture and what's happening in the world is kind of forcing us to maybe take some of this clay off a lot quicker and start loving each other and supporting each other and serving each other as you're doing with your podcast and I do with my work.
Before I bring us up to current date and really start to open and unpack some of your work for these, quote, trying times right now, you mentioned Bangkok. I've been in Southeast Asia. I guess the first time was about 8 years ago, and I've spent the better part of 7 or 8 years, the last 7 or 8 years here. Can you speak to, as you bring up that Bangkok experience, I don't know how to describe it exactly for me, but I remember seeing some of those Bangkok temples, some of those golden Buddhas for the first time, and in other countries in Southeast Asia, etc. What is it? What is it about that when you see and feel that for the first time, for example, as an American, it really changes you, broadens you, opens you up. I still don't have my finger on it exactly, but I'm so happy to have had the initial experience and to have it change me.
Yeah, I think, one of the sad things I've learned recently is I forget the exact number, but how few Americans even have a passport. The reality is when you travel, I think Mark Twain said this way back when, Samuel Clemens, he said, when you travel, you go and your beliefs get challenged. You wake up to other possibilities. The first time I went to Taj Mahal in India, the first time I saw the golden Buddhas or the reclining Buddha in Bangkok, the first time I seen some of the temples in other Asian countries, the Chinese wall, etc. It shakes you at some level because you're just not familiar with sometimes the magnitude, sometimes the reverence, sometimes the awe inspiration that is created when you climb a mountain or you go to Machu Picchu or whatever. For me, every time I travel, I meet different people. For example, the first time I was in Singapore, I had just seen the movie Gandhi. And I was kind of embarrassed that I had mostly a British background. My grandparents were British and German. When I seen what the British had done to India in the movie Gandhi, I felt kind of embarrassed about it. I was saying it to this general in the Air Force who I was having dinner with in Singapore at his home. He said, "Oh, no, thank God for the British." I said, "What? Why?" He said, "We'd have no postal system. We'd have no railroad. We'd have no communication." You just keep getting opened up to new possibilities. First time I meditated in a temple in India, I mean, I got stoned, not stoned like from marijuana, but stoned in a level where I didn't know you could feel that happy so quickly with another group of people chanting some words that I never heard before. And the same thing, I've had that in Christian meditation centers and doing Sufi dancing with the Sikhs and with the Sufis, which is a Muslim tradition of spiritual growth. Each of those just opens us up to new possibilities and seeing the world through new eyes. And I think you're just more expanded, I guess would be the word.
As we expand out today, here we are. I don't know, is this going to ultimately end up being the biggest event in the last century? I don't know. The wars were pretty terrible. World War I, World War II. This economically is going to be really trying. A lot of people, I think when they post the jobs numbers, people are going to be terrible. It's going to be so many people that have perhaps overnight feel like they've lost hope. And I think the great thing about having somebody like you on my show right now is your work's about hope. If somebody's at kind of a quote bottom, or somebody's at a transition, or somebody's just feeling terrible, if they can find their way into a lot of the work that you've put together, they can really find a chance to kind of rebuild, a chance to get started again. But I think it's probably it can take an event like this to perhaps get some people over to your world. Because look, even though you've sold all those books, there's a ton of people that have never in their entire life gone down the path of understanding the messages that you've put together.
It's very true. A small percentage. I mean, they've sold 500 million books, but you got 8 billion people on the planet, and many of those books were sold to the same person. Yes, it's absolutely the case. The good news is that there's more and more people like you and me and others who are out there doing this work. There are more podcasts, more blogs, more people talking. There are more television shows like Oprah's, people talking all the time. There are these YouTube channels with all the TEDx talks and so forth. So there is a quickening of what's happening. And I think sometimes it takes people to hit bottom to realize there's a better place to be. And I think we all now are being called to step up to a new level. One of the things that I learned early on, when a recession hits, when a depression hits, when the pandemic hits, there's actually no less food on the planet than there's ever been. There's no less dollars floating around. They're still there. There's no less toilet paper, except for the fact that people have hoarded it, but there'll be plenty of toilet paper. Everything still exists. It existed the day before the market crashed. The issue is, are we willing to keep interacting with each other and finding creative ways to support each other? Can I trade for food? Can I do something for you and you do something for me? If I'm a landlord, can I say, hey, how about you don't pay my rent for the next 3 months? I'm not going to evict you. Already some governments have made it illegal. In Canada, you can't evict anyone for 6 months right now. It's illegal. In California, it's illegal to turn off the electricity of anybody. People are starting to say, look, we're all in this together. Let's work together and let's forgive each other. So if everyone plays, it works. We just put the society on pause for a little bit. In other words, I don't pay my rent. My landlord can't pay the bank. The bank says, okay, I'm not going to charge you your mortgage payments for this apartment building you own. And then the banks are going to get bailed out by the government, because they will. Everybody can say, just calm down. One of my friends came up with an amazing idea the other day. He said, how about you borrow money from the government equal to 1 year's salary? But it's a loan. And you get 1 year, 2 years, 3 years to pay it off. And you pay it off with no interest or like 1% interest or whatever it is. But only the people who need it, not me like a millionaire, are people that are going to actually borrow it instead of what's being proposed now, which is everyone's going to get a check for $2,000. Well, how long is that going to last? Some people's rent is more than that a month, especially if you live in New York City or Los Angeles. There's a lot of creativity that's going to come forward. We all just have to say, look, we're all in this together. Let's help each other. Let's support each other. I was excited to see someone did an article recently, 2 days ago, about some woman in Canada. We have this term called scaremongers, people that go around and try to scare everybody. She came up with the term caremongers. And so she organized people in her neighborhood. She said, some people can't go out. They're too old, quarantined, or at least physically distancing ourselves from each other. How about some of the younger people? We get together and we go to our neighbors and we say, do you need any food? Can I go to the pharmacy for you? Is there anything you need done? Within one day, over 1,000 people signed up. And now nationwide, it went from one city to nationwide. Tens of thousands of people have signed up to do that. I live in a little small community called Hope Ranch, which is part of Santa Barbara, California. Already, we have a community newsletter that everyone can post things in online. There have been at least 200 posts of people saying, how can I help? High school kids saying, we're out of school. We're not going to school. I don't want to do things and get in trouble. If any of you need anything done, I've now arranged 40 kids who are all willing to help out. That kind of thing could always be done. But we just have to say, let's be humane, let's be loving, let's be kind, and let's help each other get through this.
My audience is listening to a very calm, caring individual. You talk right now. You're talking about helping and supporting each other. However, if people hear, some people hear, not me, I love this statement, but if some people hear this statement, take 100% responsibility for your life, in a moment like right now, that could cause some people to be like, I'm not listening. That guy's crazy. Forget it. That's the wrong message right now. Speak to how it's not the wrong message and it doesn't conflict with what you've been saying for the last 30 minutes at all.
Well, to really understand that statement, you have to understand a little formula I put in the first chapter of my Success Principles book. It's also in the first chapter of the Success Principles workbook, which is my new book that's just come out. And the little formula says E plus R equals O. That stands for event plus your response, that's the R, equals the outcome that you get. We have an event now called a worldwide pandemic. The result of what I'm going to experience, the outcome of what I'm experiencing right this moment, I am 100% responsible for. In other words, basically, there's three things you can control your responses: your thinking, your images, and your behavior. So that what you think, what you picture, and what you do or say. I'm responsible for that. If I start thinking I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose my house, I'm not going to be able to pay the rent, I'm going to get sick, my mother's going to die, you're going to feel crappy. If on the other hand, you say, look, I can get through this, I have the skills, the knowledge, the friendship circles, the ability to ask for what I want, the ability to negotiate, the ability to be creative, to start thinking about how can I do business from my home. For example, anyone in the business you and I are in can do podcasts online. We can do video seminars. We can do webinars. We can charge people for that. We can run multi-level businesses from home, selling all kinds of health products and essential oils and things that help build your immune system. So there's lots of different ways to become useful and to be able to make a living, even if you've lost your job as a waiter. There are other ways, there are things you can do, but you have to get creative, because the minute you go into fear, which is a choice, which is a response, you start scaring yourself by imagining terrible things. You're now in the amygdala, which is in the back of your brain, which hijacks the prefrontal cortex of your brain, which is where rational thought and creative thinking comes from. So you're not going to be able to make rational decisions. We now know in America, gun sales, just, I think it was Delaware or New Jersey, have gone up 1,400%. Meaning 1,440% more people are buying guns because they're scared people are going to run out of food and then come try to take their house and their food or their gold or whatever. That's when you're in the amygdala. You're going to make decisions that are based on fear. When you're in your prefrontal cortex, you can think rational thoughts about how can we get through this together? Where can I reach out to? How can I get what I need, etc. So basically, I'm responsible for the thoughts I think. I can think thoughts that make me feel miserable. I can think thoughts that make me feel positive. In a more calm time, I would use the example, if your husband forgets your birthday, You can think the thought, my husband doesn't love me. If he loved me, he'd remember my birthday. How does that leave you feeling? It leaves you feeling lonely, pissed off, and not that good. If you think the thought, somebody who loves me forgot my birthday, now you have some concern, but you're not feeling bad. Your self-esteem didn't go down. You're not feeling resentful. So your thoughts are one of the first things that you have control over. And we can think positive thoughts. That's why all these self-help books and podcasts and blogs and so forth are valuable to listen to. People should be listening to some uplifting messages right now, listening to the people that can keep you calm. Another thing you can do is you can visualize 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months out that your business survived, that you still have a job, you didn't lose your house, you didn't die, your kids are all well, your mom survived, etc. Because all fear comes from imagining something in the future that hasn't happened yet. Even if there was a rattlesnake or a cobra in your room, for you to feel afraid, you'd have to go into the future and imagine that snake coming around you and strangling you or biting you. That hasn't happened yet. It would be much better to be in the rational mind and say, look for exits, look for a stick, whatever. But sometimes we get so afraid, we get into fight or flight, we're not rational anymore. And then what do? Your behavior. I mean, stocking up on 9 months worth of toilet paper so that no one else has one is probably not the smartest thing to do. We know that, at least in America, the supply lines for grocery stores, for pharmacies are still very much intact, and everything's being done to keep them intact. I think that it's your responsibility to control your thoughts, control your images, and control your behavior in ways that will get you to where you want to go. I don't think it's valuable right now to be blaming the government, blaming the Chinese, as some people are doing. They're calling it the Chinese virus or the Kung flu. Those kind of things are not helpful. But I think what is helpful is to keep thinking, what will get me where I want to go? And where I want to go is thrive and survive through this.
Have you always believed it's possible, whatever it might be, or did you learn how to believe it's possible?
I learned. I grew up in a very negative family. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was an alcoholic. They blamed everything on the government, the rich capitalists, whatever it was. And so that's where I grew up. Now, I didn't really learn all this until I met W. Clement Stone. I was probably 24, something like that. It was a matter of hanging out with him and the people he hung out with, reading the books, listening to the audios and the videos, attending seminars and so forth.
To this day, I still think that's when I look at your work and I see that phrase, believe it's possible. To me, I don't know how to, look, I've not had the chance to put together the kind of work that you have done. My books have been more investing type books. But when I look at that phrase, believe it's possible, I see so many people over the last 20 years I'll come in contact with. And that seems to be the one part where they can't believe it's possible. They need some way to pull out, and you can give them a few words, you can direct them to some books, but it always just strikes me that how many people don't believe it's possible.
Well, you know what's interesting? I interviewed 75 people when I wrote the first Success Principles book. I interviewed people that were generals in the Army, people that were top salespeople, people that were Olympic and professional athletes, people that were movie stars, people like Stephen Jobs and people like that. And what happened is every one of them believed it was possible. So I thought, if you want to be successful and be one of those 1%ers or the top 3%, you got to think like they do. It's like, what thoughts are they thinking? What magazines are they reading? What books are they reading? Who are they listening to? Who are the influences in their life? And I want to get myself into that. I was just in India all of February. I went to an Ayurvedic healing center in Mumbai. My wife and I took a month off. Again, one of the reasons I look as young as I do is I do those kind of things, fasting and healing and longevity type things. Anyway, the point was there was a doctor there who was the doctor who invited me to come to this clinic, who was amazing. He was in the same lineage of doctors from the first doctor that was Buddha's physician. So for 2,500 years, they've been passing down these traditions of ancient healing. We often talk about alternative medicine. It's really allopathic Western medicine that's alternative. For 2,000 years, they've been testing all these herbs and acupuncture points and so forth that we know work. One of the things he said was when he went to work with his teacher, he said, I'll teach you, but you have to devote 1,000 days to being my student, meaning for 3 years, you have to do everything I do, drink what I drink, eat what I eat, think what I think, read what I read, meditate when I meditate, etc. And if you'll do that for 3 years, I'll teach you. Today, we all want to learn something by reading one book, listening to 2 podcasts, or watching 10 TED Talks. The reality is it takes time to get that clay off the golden Buddha that we talked about earlier. Someone once said, I love this quote, said, success is a marathon, not a sprint. And so 26 miles as opposed to a 100-yard dash takes a little time, a little commitment. But I think we all can learn to believe that it's possible. And then just recently, I wrote a foreword to 2 books. One was called From Homeless to Billionaire by a guy who arrived in Thailand when he was 22 or 3. Maybe he was 19, I think, actually. And now he's 35 and he's a billionaire 3 times over. He went from homeless, living on the beach in Phuket, to being a billionaire. And then I wrote the foreword to another book called The Billionaire's Secret, written by Raphael Bedziak from Poland, I think. He interviewed 21 billionaires. It took him 5 years to get to 21 billionaires who would actually give him this time. Every one of them, from the time they were a kid, chose to believe it was possible. And a lot of people talked about it was a choice. I just knew that if I was going to be successful, I had to believe it was possible. Because we won't do what's not possible. If I said to you, I'm going to do a seminar tonight, 10 o'clock, it's going to be online. I will teach everyone within 1 hour how to levitate at least 1 foot off the ground for 20 minutes. No one signs up. Why? Because they've never seen anyone do it. They've never heard of anyone that could do it. And so they don't believe it's possible. And I wouldn't blame them. But the fact is, if you didn't believe it was possible, you'll never sign up. I'm not suggesting you should for that. But the point is that you have to believe it's possible, or you won't take the time to invest the time, the money, and the effort to achieve what it is you want to achieve.
This podcast that you're on right now, I think I've done 500 plus interviews in the last 8 years. There's been 6 Nobel Prize winners on here, a lot of people that you probably know personally. I want to ask you, though, as you mentioned the 75 that you spoke with, these really prominent folks, Steve Jobs is an example for the success principles. Who stands out? Because there's got to be a couple that really just stand out. Not that they weren't all great and valuable, but who stands out? And what were some of those just moments where you're like, wow, something just happened there. The electricity just sparked and you were like, oh my, okay, this really grabbed me. Does anything really jump out at you of those 75?
Well, I'll share a story that jumped out at me that it was not my story. It's one from the Billionaire's Secret book. But when I was reading that to write the foreword, it blew me away. There was a kid in China who was not good in school. In fact, he just hated it so much he managed to get himself thrown out. He was literally, as a teenager, the only thing he could do was tend the cows in his little local rural community. At one point, he realized, I'm never going to be anything if I don't change my way. And he said, I need to study and I need to learn to read. They wouldn't let him back in school. So he would take his brother's textbook and he would have his brother teach him some words. And finally, he realized he needed to get a dictionary. He went down to the river and with a sickle, he would cut grass in the morning and then sell it to the farmers to feed to their cows like hay. It took him 1.5 years to earn enough yuan in order to buy a dictionary. And then he memorized every word in that dictionary. And then he realized he needed an encyclopedia if he was really going to become educated. It took him 3.5 years to make enough money to buy an encyclopedia. And little by little, he educated himself to where eventually, I believe I have the story right, he is now one of the major manufacturers of all auto windshields in the world. And he's now a billionaire. And I thought about what kind of courage and what kind of belief it takes to know at that young age, if I'm going to be successful, I have to change my ways. I have to believe it's possible. I mean, you and I could go out now. There's a dictionary online. We have a computer. He didn't have that. But the perseverance it takes to spend 3 years just to earn enough money to go buy a dictionary. You and I will walk into Barnes & Noble or go on Amazon and buy a dictionary in a minute. That kind of story inspires me. And every story in that book was someone like that who started repairing computers and then couldn't get parts for computers. So then they had to become a parts importer. Then eventually they became the #1 computer distributor in all of Eastern Europe. Little by little, just doing the next thing, believing that if I do this and do it well, it will lead to the next thing, and then I'll be successful.
I've had the chance to be in mainland China many times. I've had a chance to walk on the Great Wall. It's a great experience, as you noted earlier. I've also had the chance to speak before. I think at one time it was a crowd of 1,500 people. For a guy writing investment books, that was pretty amazing. I've never seen anything like that. And everybody was so energized and so juiced. And I think you make a point earlier also about this time where, okay, the virus that has swept the world happened to have come from China. I do hear a lot of negative messages about China right now, and I think it's unfortunate because every time that I've been in mainland China in the last decade, All I have felt is people that just want to share with me, people that want me to see what's going on there. And I got to tell you, when you go to a place like Shanghai, as you know, oh my gosh, you're like, wow, this is crazy. The amount of human energy and achievement is off the hook. And I really do think that right now, this is a trying time, but I think people are losing sight of the fact that what's going on in China is not exactly what's going on in the media.
No. There's very little that goes on in the media that's really reflective of anything real in the world, from my opinion. I was over in Iran a couple years ago. That's considered one of the axis of evil. The Americans are not supposed to like Iran. We had a little tiff where we were sending missiles back and forth a couple months ago. Everybody there loved me. I was checking out of my hotel at 4 a.m. and to get the flight to Dubai to come home. And this young 20-year-old at 4 a.m. reaches across, he looks around and he says, "I love your country." And I said, "Really? Tell me more." "I love your music. I love your art. I love your television shows. I love your clothes." The fact is, most people just want to raise their kids. They want to have a job. They want to do well. They want to do what they love to do. They want to grow themselves. They want to not get sick and die. They want their children to be healthy, etc. It's our governments that get in the way. And then the media fans all that because whenever there's fear or panic, just like we're seeing now, that's what makes people watch. Used to say in the media, blood sells. I think the fact that most people are just humane, caring, nice people. There are some crazies out there for sure, but we know who they are. We can feel it when we get close to them. But I agree with you. I think a lot of countries and a lot of people take a bad rap, and I don't think it's good for anybody.
I would hazard a guess that right now, not because of the virus, but perhaps in spite of it, but I would think that there could be no greater opportunity for just about anything than right now. Because you mentioned the story earlier, at the very beginning about, okay, I got a divorce from my wife. It wasn't great. It forced me to rethink things. If people are truly open and let go of their prior scripts that they had planned and are open to what's right now, the possibilities that have opened because of this trying time are endless.
Mm-hmm. Just to give you an example of creativity, I was on a podcast this morning with a guy up in Canada who is an entrepreneur, and he works with entrepreneurs. And he was giving some examples of what people are doing. One guy owns a gym. He has a ton of treadmills and bicycles and spinning bicycles and all that stuff. Of course, you're not allowed to go out in the world. You can't congregate in gymnasiums. They've all been shut down in California, and spas and all this kind of stuff, workout places. He quickly decontaminated everything, went online to all his customers and says, if you'd like to rent a bike or a treadmill or some weights or whatever, I would be glad to deliver them to your home. You'll pay a rental fee. That'll allow me to keep my doors open. I'll be able to pay my rent and so forth. When it's all done, I'll take them back and we can continue on as usual. That kind of creativity is what's being required by people now. When the first big financial crash happened in 2008, a lot of people went online on eBay to sell stuff so they could survive. This one woman realized most people had never used UPS and they'd never shipped anything bigger than maybe a box like you can carry. Now they're selling dressers and they're selling stereo systems and all that. She put an ad in the local paper and then started taking Facebook ads and Google ads. If you sell something, I'll come pick it up and I'll ship it for you and you'll pay me a small fee for that. She made out like a bandit during that period of time by being creative. I think we're being asked to be creative. We're being asked to think outside the box. We're being asked to think, how can I partner up with people to do things? And I think we're being asked to think just in terms of how do we relate to people in general? Can we do something where we're selling from our heart, not from fear? A lot of the selling that goes on is fear-based. There's only 3 left, and if you don't buy by midnight, you're not going to be able to get the discount and all that kind of stuff. I think we need to let that go right now.
As you were giving that story about the guy in Canada, I thought to myself, gosh, I've got to give Jack one that he can pass on to the next person. Vietnam exports a lot of dragon fruit to China. But in the middle of this, the exporting of dragon fruit has basically stopped. A lot of rotting dragon fruit in Vietnam. So the enterprising bakers in Saigon have figured out that if they take the dragon fruit pulp and when they're making their banh mi bread, use dragon fruit pulp, the pink dragon fruit, instead of water, they're now ending up with banh mi loaves that have got a pink hue with a kind of aromatic fruit taste, very light, and it's delicious. And so here you have the mother of all invention. China can't buy dragon fruit right now because of this. And so they use dragon fruit for pulp to make the bread. All of a sudden, I'm sure in the not too distant future, Vietnam will become famous for its pink banh mi.
There you go. There you go. And there'll be a lot of that will happen. I think another thing too, and I would just say this not to sound self-serving, but this is a time when people are home. I teach something in the morning called the Hour of Power, for example, which is 20 minutes of meditation, 20 minutes of reading, and 20 minutes of exercise. I'm doing some fitness kind of thing. Most people are sequestered and they can't get out of their home. So now you don't have that hour-long or 2-hour-long commute in the morning, and or if you add them up at the end of the day and so forth. So why not read those books you've been putting off? Why not engage in some self-reflection? Why not engage in meditation? And whether it's my book or someone else's book is irrelevant, but I think that there's so many things right now that you can do to get fitter, to develop your brain, to get some more information, to clean up some messes. One of the chapters in my workbook is clean up your messes and incompletes. My wife and I, this weekend, normally I would have been out at this fundraiser in Los Angeles helping Bob Proctor and some other people raise money for a foundation called Unstoppable that builds schools in Africa, but that was canceled. We've cleaned out our garage. We have gone through all of our Tupperware and made everything fit, and the things that don't have caps are going out to Goodwill. We have gone through our clothes and said, I'm never going to wear that again. So there's a lot of things you can do right now that are things you've been putting off. Spending time with your family, spending time with your kids, developing your website, writing that book you've been thinking about, putting together the outlines for the next 10 podcasts you want to do. The key thing is to look at, again, the opportunities that exist and focus on, well, I often teach this concept called turning a have to into a get to. I used to have to drive on the 405 freeway in LA. And if you know anything about that, it's 12 lanes wide. It looks like a parking lot at 5 o'clock. But I created some games I could play as I was driving home. One game was called Don't Touch the Brake. It was like golf. The low score wins, and I'm always trying to break my score. So if I drive really, really, really slow and leave enough space between me and the car in front of me, I'll never have to hit the brake. But if I drive too slow, a car is going to come in from the right side or the left side into the lane that's now got an open space in it in front of me, and I have to hit the brake. It's a fun game to play. This commute, which used to be a pain in the butt, became a fun time. Now that you have to be sequestered or your business is not allowed to operate or whatever, ask yourself, how can I turn this into a get to? What are the things that I get to do that I normally didn't get to do? And I think a lot of that can be very useful and helpful in terms of your income, making money. You could be studying the stock market, reading books by Ray Dalio and Tony Robbins, Unshakable, and all that kind of stuff. Don't think of this as negative. Think of it as a unseen for yet positive, and start looking for the good.
I got to tell you, the one thing that I really love about the success principles, beyond the content, the heavy content of the book, but I love reading a table of contents that when you finish reading the table of contents, you're already energized to go run through a wall. I mean, right? Because I admire how much time and energy went into the table of contents. I mean, seriously. The book, The Success Principles Workbook, an action plan for getting from where you are to where you want to be. And good-looking Jack on the front cover to go along with the book, The Success Principles as well. Where can we send people, Jack? What's the best website beyond Amazon to buy all your books? But where's the best website would you like to direct people to?
Well, I think go to the successprinciplesworkbook.com and you can get some free bonuses there if you buy the book and let us know you did it. Or if you buy it through the website, ours, it'll take you to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, whatever. You get 10 weeks of a video coaching program by me for free. You get to download the first chapter of the book when you go there and you buy it before the book will ever come to you in the mail. And also, I'm doing some live master classes where I'm teaching 2 hours from the workbook, where I'll take you through some of the exercises, literally some of the core exercises that are normally things I don't teach. I learned some amazing things in India that I'm going to share with people about how to actually activate your subconscious mind in ways that I've been teaching this for like 50 some years. And I learned some new things that I'm going to be sharing in that. That's probably the best way to go. And I would also encourage you, just go to jackcanfield.com and sign up to be on my mailing list, because I've done 3 free seminars on how to survive in a challenging time. And I'll be continuing to do that. Another thing that I'll do over the next couple of months is I'm going to do some free seminars where I take you for an hour. One of the things we know is that all your limiting beliefs, the majority of them started between the ages of 3 and 8 years old. We can go back through a technique I've learned to literally take you back to that time and get you unstuck. So the reason you're stuck and not being able to make a relationship work or get the finances you want or the job you want or whatever it is, we can literally find the limiting belief that's keeping you stuck, that's unconscious, that you don't even know you have. And we can release that belief. I did this for over 12,000 people in the month of January, just as a gift to my mailing list. The results were extraordinary. There's a number of things you can get, and you'll be on the list to receive information about that. Just jackcanfield.com.
As you note, there's no better time with all the time that we have being locked up in the house to go jump right in, right?
Exactly.
Jack, I appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. This was really fun. I had a good time. You're a good guy to just hang out and talk with.
Thank you, sir. Take care, man.
Okay, you too, buddy.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.